I like to start. I normally train a little bit earlier in the day. I like to start my day off working out, doing hard things.
Who are you talking to?
What, do I not talk to this? Don't talk to him. Talk to you.
We're not on social media now. This is a real documentary.
This is TV. This is the level up from that. Sorry, I forgot, mate. I'm used to my mere social media life.
We just pretend those aren't there.
Yeah, okay, fair
The
enough.
Manosphere, the Red Pill, mgtow, that whole umbrella of terms has been a big phenomenon online for the last decade or so. A collection of online influencers and movements focused on men's experiences with dating, with earning money, gender politics, and their own masculine identity. Groups often very extreme in their views that lean heavily into phobias, conspiracy theories, and both framing men as victims in an unfair modern world, but at the same time framing men as needing to be tough, and any of them who are victims as being weak and pathetic. I think that just about works as a summary. Now, this isn't a topic I've ever discussed too much on my channel before because it's such a broad umbrella and vast rabbit hole that it's difficult to know where to start and how to stop a video about it spiralling out of control. However, acclaimed documentarian Theroux recently released an hour-and-a-half documentary on Netflix about the Manosphere, having interviewed and spent time alongside some of the influencers from within that circle, and it made me want to talk about all of this. I think it was a very worthwhile documentary. I'm not a social psychologist. I haven't studied the Manosphere. My opinion is hardly going to be the most accurate one. However, I am a children's therapist. I have worked with young adolescents that have been drawn in by the Manosphere. I mean, a lot of the time I've been working with kids who are at risk of being brought into gangs, but there tends to be a bit of an overlap there. I've seen some of the effects of this culture for a while, and it feels like the right time to discuss it. So if that interests you, settle yourself down. We're going to have a Dave's Walk going, and we're going to begin with something a bit less dark and concerning, which is, of course, a very cool train. So there's lots of different things we could talk about with this documentary. I actually think it's a bit too short and needed an extra episode or two to cover the sprawling mass of different elements, and yet even with just one episode there is a lot for me to discuss, too much for a video, so I am going to focus on a few of the most striking elements, the things that stood out to me the most, and if you would like me to make more videos like this one, please let me know. There is definitely a lot more I could say. However, yeah, we're going to focus mainly on Harrison Sullivan, or HStikkytokky, and some of the stuff his interviews bring up. And it's difficult to describe exactly what he does. He posts videos and live streams of working out, showing off his wealth, shilling for trading platforms or coaching, showing pickup artistry, and I guess pulling off what you can call pranks at best. At worst, it just seems like assault. In Harrison's words, though...
I coach boys how to be fucking boys. How to make money, how to be outside the system, how to not have a boss telling you what to do. I teach guys to be proper guys, not these little soy boys, gimps that walk around in the modern day.
Now, firstly, that's a pretty vague statement, and I think it's always going to be a bit vague. I don't think anyone in this documentary ever really pins down what exactly makes a man weak or strong in their eyes, and that's unsurprising, because the things they do say are fraught with so many contradictions that reflect badly upon themselves. For example, a strong man should take on all responsibility, and yet this is a whole documentary of influencers refusing to take any responsibility for any of their actions. I guess we could maybe infer in his comment that Harrison is saying any man who has a boss telling them what to do is not a proper man, but that argument hardly stands up to much scrutiny because the world wouldn't function if every man was the boss of their own company or brand, and what does that even mean anyway? Harrison might not have a boss in a literal sense, but he still will have sponsorship obligations, he will still be a slave to the demands of the algorithm, so much so that he even admits he doesn't think his content is good or necessarily what he wants to make, but it's just what grows his fame the most, which, yeah, maybe isn't having a boss telling you what to do literally, but it doesn't feel like he's escaped the system at all. When Louis asks Harrison if he sees him that way as one of those soy boy gimps, Harrison looks at his muscles as well as wondering what his skills are.
Would you see me that way?
I'm not sure. I'd have to see what your skills are.
Did you look at my arms?
Skills? What does skills mean? You know? How good is Louis on the banjo? Can he recite the alphabet backwards? What are Harrison's skills exactly? He puts in a commendable amount of work at the gym, and I suppose from a certain point of view there is a skill to picking up random women in Marbella. These are presumably acceptable masculine skills that encapsulate Harrison's idea of a proper man, but what about the many thought-provoking and moving documentaries Louis Theroux has made? Is provoking thought something that adds value to a man? And if it doesn't, does that mean it was all pointless, that there was no personal purpose or merit to anything Louis has done in his career because it doesn't strengthen a masculine image? How suffocating and dull an existence that would be, where your entire value as a human being depends on working out and picking up women like mere objects for validation, where the entire scope of anything else you might achieve of your life doesn't really matter, isn't worth chasing. I mean, how are you supposed to feel value for a lot of the parts of you that might fit all these other categories if they're no longer relevant? You know, some of that is conjecture on my part based on the context of the rest of the documentary, but the point is, by all metrics, Harrison is likely to grade another man's worth. Louis probably grades quite low. I doubt he'd mind me saying that. He's a 55-year-old man who isn't out of shape but is not physically imposing. He is a calm, quiet man who makes documentaries through a disarming persona. So is it not striking then that despite Louis not having big masculine energy, at least in the sense Harrison would take it, how much Harrison feels compelled to compete with Louis, or how often he feels threatened or under attack? Because there's a lot of clips we can show to suggest that, and well, we'll get to them in a second actually. I want to pivot for a moment first because some of the following clips inevitably make Harrison look pretty ridiculous. And there's been a lot of stuff online from this documentary clipping up bits of Harrison, laughing at him, calling him pathetic, and I'm not going to defend him at all. However, I do want to highlight we don't solve this kind of problem by just shooting down individual influencers, exposing their ridiculousness, tearing down their image, teasing them, or I suppose a lot of them do that to themselves in the end, or get themselves arrested. None of it tackles the fact social media algorithms tend to incentivize extremist and divisive content, you know? As much as there are deeper impulses behind what Harrison does that we will discuss shortly, the fact chasing clout benefits him so much financially not only allows him to feed his worst impulses, but actually trains and encourages him to do so. The algorithm can be a bit of a whirlpool, sucking in creators and audiences alike, and there is an increasing wealth of research behind the dangers, and I think we all know how much of our lives are lost to the algorithm. But what if there was something that could help you, or maybe even your kids? Help you switch off when you need to actually step out of a bubble and live your life again. This video is sponsored by Scrolly, the little smiley fella here that keeps my phone from distracting me. Scrolly is a really simple device where you just set which apps you want to block, you tap Scrolly with your phone, and then you leave the house or pop it somewhere out of reach, and there's no way to use those apps until you come back and tap it again. Totally blocked. That's so perfect if you want to go out with your friends or go for a walk with your thoughts or just enjoy yourself without being hounded by work emails. Best of all, the app is totally free. No subscription. You just order one of these Scrollies from your site and that's yours for life. Plus, you can even get one for 10% off with the code TREE10. So yeah, if you want to reclaim your life from the allure of the algorithm, then click the link in the description or the pinned comment and make sure to use the code Scrolly. So yeah, where were we? We're about to look at some clips of Harrison, and there's a strange defensiveness to this first example, I think.
Do you do a leg day?
Yeah, you tell. Yeah. Silly question then, isn't it, mate?
Several times, Louis makes a disarming joke to try and build rapport, either at Harrison's expense or kind of at his own. A few times he jokes about the big Netflix camera crew he has with him, and there's a little glint of defensiveness there in the way Harrison laughs it off as though he took it as a veiled insult that he's now having to grin and bear.
Oh, okay, this is TV. This is the level up. I'm used to my mere social media life.
You know, both of those first ones are incredibly minor. However, I wanted to start with them to highlight that there is some sense to this. You know, I think Harrison does feel a little lower status when his phone-operated camera team is set against an expensive Netflix studio. I think that's understandable. And when Harrison quickly learns more about Louis Theroux, he becomes much more defensive because he worries the documentary will be a hit piece on him. Yeah, that makes sense. don't get me wrong. I think all of the influencers who appear in this documentary are incredibly wary about how they come across because they have a brand to protect, and it's often a very paper-thin brand, for which they're equally keen to try and control the narrative. Nonetheless, the degree to which Harrison is affected is striking, and how personally as well. Having learned more about Louis after their first day together, he is more guarded on the second day, and I suppose petulant as well. Louis greets him and says good morning, but nobody gets up or pays him attention at first. And when he asks Harrison how he is, he immediately beelines to bragging about a blowjob.
How are you doing?
Pretty good. I went to bed late because I was out getting content last night. Got a video of me getting sucked off in the toilet.
It's just such a good example of just brilliant, unintended comedic timing. How are you? Oh yeah, I'm tired because I was up late last night having so much sex with all these women. You know, he's very keen to tell Louis that from the first second they meet here. I have all this sex that you don't get because you're not as desirable a man. But he also adds, weirdly...
Bet you'd like to see that.
Which I suppose is supposed to be an insult, calling Louis gay? Harrison shows a lot of homophobia this documentary alongside his racism and misogyny, but the comments somewhat undermined when Harrison himself is the one very keen to show Louis the footage. It's like he wanted Louis to see it, but he didn't also want to be seen wanting Louis to see it. And when he does show him, I love you can see him trying to restrain his face from breaking into a proud smirk. Like, are you impressed? A woman sucked me off. I don't want to make fun of him too much. My point was supposed to be that I find this interesting because Harrison appears incredibly eager to project this image onto the world. I have a great life. Women desire me all of the time. And you, Louis, you and all of these vaguely defined category of weak men out there, you are all really jealous. Which we have to take with a grain of salt, or a pinch of salt, whichever one it is. He is, again, on a documentary, and he has his brand to think of. Nonetheless, all of the showing of his fancy cars, flashing his money, getting videos where he's clearly asked this woman, can you just stay here positioned like this while I film real quick? All of the stuff that I imagine to be a bit performative, a bit for the cameras to help draw engagement and to better sell the lifestyle he's trying to sell to his customers. Suddenly, I wonder if it's not all as performative for the cameras as it appears. You know, this interaction here strikes me as a really personal one between him and Louis, which suggests that despite how often he says all of his behaviour is just for the clout, just to gain views, what if it's not just that? If this dynamic here with Louis, that look how amazing my life is, Louis, with that sharper edge of you don't have this, do you? I bet you're jealous, I bet you wish you were me. What if that actually reflects something quite truthful about Harrison? Which, I mean, isn't really a revelation when you think about it, but I hadn't really thought about this before. I've never really watched any clips of Andrew Tate or the Fresh and Fit podcast or any of these people before. I mean, I know the exact kind of things they do say and the effect it has on the kids watching, but I've never really considered their perspective, that of the influencers themselves and their motivations behind it beyond the money. And so to kind of see that here, for me, it's more shocking that they aren't just saying any old thing for the sake of engagement, that they might genuinely mean a lot of it. That maybe Harrison is genuinely and sincerely as ridiculous as he appears, even when he insists otherwise.
You sound a bit like Bonnie Blue.
Me posting a picture with a few girls is the same as getting shagged by 1,000 guys.
It's rationalising.
Don't compare me to Bonnie.
It's rationalising. Are you getting triggered?
I mean, I'm a bit reticent to psychoanalyse too much because Harrison is a real person and this video inevitably is going to have to be a bit critical towards him in ways that could become quite unfair if I'm not careful, and I think it's just generally unethical to sit here and attempt to psychoanalyse someone like this. Really exposing thing to do to a real person, and also it's going to be inaccurate because I've never met him. If that's what you're hoping for this video, I'm sorry, we're only going to dip our toes a little bit, and we're only going to speak in more generalised senses. So, in a generalised sense, what might it say about someone who very, very keenly tries to push the idea of their superiority, I suppose we could call it, their greater masculinity, to try and push this hierarchy of it, where the other person is less and you are more, in all of their interactions with other men. I don't think it's saying anything profound to suggest they might feel a bit insecure in their masculinity and sense of self. I mean, I actually talked about this kind of point quite a lot in my psychoanalysis of the character Theon Greyjoy from A Song of Ice and Fire recently. It's not unethical to analyse deeper when it's a fictional character, so I did a lot there. But secondly, maybe Harrison feels a bit threatened by Louis as well, which again is interesting because Louis doesn't exude the kind of traits Harrison associates with masculinity or associates with being a threat. So if he feels threatened nonetheless, then surely on a more subconscious level, Harrison must realise his very rigid perception of masculinity falls short of reality. That men do have value beyond the few traits he insists are important, and actually, even that those traits might be attractive. Kirsty was telling me this morning that her TikTok feed has been flooded by women who have a bit of a crush on Louis Theroux. Deep down, does even Harrison know there's more value to a man beyond just physique and game and status and all of these things? More value than he wants to recognise? If so, it means absorbing himself with just those few traits will always fall short of the sense of security he might be chasing. Insisting this will make him feel like a proper man, whilst also restricting himself from being anything else at all. Anything beyond a manufactured cartoon caricature of a man. No wonder you'd never feel secure in yourself. You've never explored the boundaries of who you could be. You've never let yourself just be. Trapped in a self-imposed war, guarding your own sense of self while needing to judge and grade all other men in comparison to you with some imagined scale of strength. That would be exhausting to have to do in every single conversation. That was a bit of a tangent, but by threats, I don't mean in the sense Harrison would take that phrase, that he is under threat of Louis coming in and stealing his woman. Your sense of security is not intrinsically tied to the women in your life and how attracted they are to you. It is obviously more than that. I mean threats in the sense Harrison just generally feels a little inferior deep down. His self-esteem is under threat, I suppose. Despite Louis being very calm and disarming and attempting to be the opposite of a threat, Harrison appears more and more threatened as this documentary goes on.
Like, if you want to call me a pimp, scammer, racist, homophobic dickhead, I'm all of those. I'm all of those, Theroux. And what? What are you going to do about it, pussy-hole? Nothing.
Louis talks to the OnlyFans star Ellie Nuts, asking what she thinks about the fact Harrison is disgusted by OnlyFans models whilst also profiting off platforms that promote them. And Harrison is on his phone live streaming in the background, and he is amused to read out the comment.
LD commented saying Louis Theroux's getting slops off the blonde.
No.
For the second time, he is very keen to bring Louis' sexuality into this, to project onto him this same need, this desire that Louis is really, really wanting to have sex with all of these models. That this desire dominates all Louis' interactions with women, which is interesting because it suggests that desire dominates Harrison's interactions with women, but also it suggests Harrison does maybe feel threats on that level as well. I mean, okay, this one is a big stretch on my part. In fact, most of the things I think I'm saying in this video are a leap. I am uncomfortable analysing someone real. I do want you to take all of this with a pinch of salt. It might not all literally relate to Harrison, but I think it is all a good general example of the kind of things that can go on for these type of influencers. Also, this isn't even Harrison's comment, this is one he's reading out from someone else. But the comment here opens up space to laugh about the fact Louis might want a blowjob and laugh at his imagined desire there, but also to laugh at how ridiculous Harrison thinks that is. The idea that Louis would ever be given that here. It is funny to suggest Louis is getting slops off the blonde because Harrison finds it an absurd possibility, and his eagerness to laugh, to look and gauge Louis' reaction to that laughter, suggests he wants to jab at Louis there, to say, it is absurd you would ever get that. You who are not a proper man, you who can't get what I get. But if that is then true, and again this is quite a tenuous leap, but if it is, why the need to laugh and make that kind of jab at all? Especially to a man who has shown zero interest in the sex here, unless part of you does feel some sense of threat here. This is projecting the same sexuality onto Louis that Harrison himself has, this same constant need for sex, projecting that onto Louis and then having to shoot it down as a result, having to go to war with a sense of threat you yourself have invented. I think that is a real leap for me to be making based off a single comment, but it's an interesting thought nonetheless. Both Louis and Ellie are unamused here anyway. They react a bit like parents when their child has said something foolish.
Male audience, what can you expect?
Surprising, is it?
No.
And in realising the joke has made Harrison the outsider rather than Louis as he'd intended, Harrison very quickly backs down.
I'm just saying what the chat is saying, man. I've got to be entertained in the chat.
Let's move on to a bigger point though. As things go on, Harrison starts using the live stream to try and unnerve Louis, to catch him off guard, to get some jabs in via his own live stream that he can clip up.
You got anything to say to the live, Theroux?
Not really.
Someone's saying that you're very good friends with Jimmy Savile. What have you got to say for yourself?
Jimmy Savile. Well, I helped to expose him while he was alive.
They're saying you're friends, and
Well, he's dead, so I can't be friends
you
with him
used to
now.
have a few freak-offs. Anyway, on that note, let's keep it stepping.
If you don't know who Jimmy Savile is, he was a BBC presenter popular in the 70s and 80s who sexually abused men, women and children throughout his career on a huge scale, and was only truly publicly exposed after his death. I made a video about him once and the psychology behind the man. As much as I've said I'm reticent to psychoanalyze real people, I felt a man who had been dead 2 decades and was, well, Jimmy Savile, it was an important video to make in a specific instance where it doesn't feel unethical to do so. Louis Theroux once made a documentary about Savile, though, while he was alive, before everything was exposed about him, spending a few days in his company and pressing Savile about the allegations of abuse. Not pressing as much as he should have done, I don't think, but it was still obviously one of the intentions behind that documentary, to see what he could expose about Savile. The clip is interesting though, firstly because it shows the most surface level knowledge of Theroux's career here. Secondly, again, how eager he is to bring Louis' sexuality into everything. And actually how that's the thing you have to say in relation to Britain's most notorious and horrific sexual offender. To treat those crimes as something funny, to laugh at Louis over. Actually, can we pivot here again for a second? In the middle of me highlighting what's so interesting about that clip. We're going to come back to it in a moment. But saying that has reminded me of another distasteful undercurrent to Harrison's pranks. Harrison does what I can assume is his own version of To Catch a Predator. We see this first with his sidekick Eds in the documentary, who does live streams of predator stings. The documentary doesn't specify how, but I assume this means making fake profiles of underage girls and then matching with men on the internet, organising a meetup, and then when the men arrive, accusing them of being predators.
In several recent encounters, Ed forced them to eat pet food.
Now, I'm not going to debate the morality of predator stings. What interests me more is why Ed and then Harrison are very keen to do this, where it ties into their content, what it means for them. We later see Harrison organise a sting in a documentary while Louis is there, where they just assault the man when he turns up, and Harrison then very quickly, I think, slips into legal lawyer defence mode when Louis asks him about it.
It looked like an assault.
Yeah,
Was that not the plan?
of course not. I've never done that in my life. You can't just do that to a random person.
My point is, the contrast Harrison often seems keen to emphasise between a proper man who can attract random women, who has game, who can get blowjobs in nightclub toilets from them. That and disgusting men who assault or target children or have freak-offs and should be humiliated and laughed at. And yeah, people who commit sexual assaults are awful. It is a horrible, incredibly damaging and traumatic thing to do to someone. But why should it be relevant to Harrison's content? Why the need to draw the contrast? Why is getting to humiliate and look down on them so much of an interest and an excitement to him? They clearly have fun attacking this man. I think it's again basically the main projection. Proper men like me can attract women freely. Weak men, they have to take it by force. They have no other choice. Their thoughts are just as dominated by sex as my own, obviously. Everyone must think about sex as much as I do, but they can't get it, therefore they are creeps. And, you know, a lot of sexual assault doesn't just boil down into someone who wants sex and is unable to obtain it consensually. Often it's a lot more to do with wanting to exert power. But how quickly it goes from a very serious crime here into something amusing you can laugh at other people about. A simple means to project feelings of worthlessness and disgust for your own satisfaction. Disgust is the word Harrison uses a lot this documentary. He says it about gay people, he says it about OnlyFans models and Bonnie Blue, and about predators. That's as far as I'm going to take that point. So returning to the comment Harrison made about Savile, it's interesting also how quickly Harrison pivots away after that comment, before Louis can respond, like sneaking in a jab and running off afterwards. Why not stand there? Why not hear Louis' response? Why not talk about it further? Why not show some curiosity or interest? Why this need to control the narrative, to reduce Louis down to someone you can just take the piss out of for a clip? And, you know, I think that's a theme prevalent throughout the influences this documentary. The lack of curiosity any of them show to other people, the lack of any genuine attempts to connect or to learn or to grow, but just to treat all others like subjects in their own monologues and their own worldview that they do not want challenged ever, no matter how repetitive that makes everything for them. This is again a need for control though. If you're going to make a hit piece on me, I can do the same to you. I have power, I'm the strong one, whilst at the same time running away from any actual discussion or possible challenge with Louis. And finally, this clip is interesting because he seems to have started just calling Louis by his surname now. He starts addressing him simply as
Theroux.
Not really.
which feels like such a schoolboy way of trying to put someone down. You know, like, he's a 55-year-old man. Do you really think this would upset him beyond the age of 12? He calls him Mr. Bean as well. He competes with him at a punch bag machine and then laughs as much as he possibly can when Louis scores lower.
Theroux, hit one. Gay. Gay. What the fuck? Hey, Theroux, is that how you'd punch if someone was coming into your house about to attack you and your family?
I have to admit, I've had so many interactions with 11 or 12-year-old kids exactly like this kind of cheap insult at work, especially early into the work with them, and especially if they've been made to attend therapy. Well, not exactly against their will, but their parents or the social workers have been the ones pushing for it, and they've been kind of reluctant and felt like it was a bit out of their control. And, you know, that's a totally understandable thing to feel, and of course they want to find some control and autonomy within the sessions, and as the work progresses, they realise there can be a lot of that for them, and they start to feel more relaxed. But to start with, before I've built a connection, there can be a lot of these same very schoolboy, insecure impulses to shoot me down, to take jabs at me, to see either if I can be provoked into terminating the sessions, or else just to try and feel on a level above me, to try and feel like they're the one with the control. I can't tell you how much stuff I've been called in the past. My favourite lighter example I can share is that I have the arms of a spider monkey, slightly contradicted a few moments later by calling me a big dumb gorilla. But because I think of these experiences, I can't help finding this aspect of Harrison slightly endearing. I mean, I think this is partly my own countertransference here, and I imagine I'm very much in the minority because he is awful throughout this documentary. He has genuinely done a lot of harm to so many children, and I've had so many conversations in sessions where kids have spouted the exact kind of nonsense he talks up, so don't get me wrong there, I'm excusing none of this. But I also can't help seeing the vulnerable kid beneath the surface of Harrison, and I think of all the kids I've seen grow beyond a lot of this kind of behaviour, and I think this could almost be kind of sweet if it wasn't also so harmful. I feel sad to see what he's become instead. As I say though, I think that arguably says a lot more about my own countertransference feelings rather than Harrison as a person. But he takes all of this to another level when he plans an ambush for Louis at the end of this documentary. He agrees to meet Louis one last time, but he secretly sets up a live stream in advance, lies to Louis about it, says they're not live streaming when they actually are, and using it as a way to try and bombard him with all sorts of gotcha moments so he can make Louis look ridiculous.
Can I ask you a question? Are Israel committing genocide? You're a puppet. You can't say what you want to say.
What do you want to think about what?
You're a puppet. You're a
My
puppet.
opinion.
You're a puppet the same way you are for Savile. Puppet, mate.
And again, he walks away talking over Louis' response, calling him a puppet because he wants to dominate what this interaction is, make this as clippable a moment as possible. But again, it shows a surface level understanding of Louis Theroux, who has made 2 documentaries on this topic, one as far back as 2011 and the other one last year. But Harrison's not interested in that. He knows nothing about it, he just wants to make Louis look like a puppet, for his own sense of power and control. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of this documentary is how all of the subjects Louis interviews all fight to control the narrative for themselves, to use their own filming to be in control, to see Louis as a threat to that control. And again, is that just out of wariness to protect their brand, or does it also suggest a deeper impulse towards needing control in their own lives, needing certainty and mastery over all things? One of the things most appealing about the Manosphere is that it offers you the illusion of control for those who might feel powerless or forgotten or unacknowledged. In a lot of ways, the whole thing is a power fantasy that you try to live out and have to project onto others in order to maintain it, like this engine that needs constant feeding. And if you call out all of the ridiculousness or the contradictory or harmful behaviour, and if you talk toxic masculinity, the whole community there then closes ranks and says, our masculinity is under attack. People are trying to stop men being proper men. And then the Manosphere at large becomes something of an ecosystem designed to cope with feelings of insecurity or shame or rejection or a lack of wealth and direction, a lack of autonomy in our own own lives. And in that sense, I sometimes wonder if toxic masculinity is the wrong phrase. If it just makes it too easy to shame and condemn these people in ways that would only push them further into following these kind of influencers. I think this is still kind of a flawed phrase, but I think insecure masculinity is probably a better phrase to draw a distinction that makes it harder to dismiss the criticism by saying masculinity is under attack. Because I think insecure masculinity points out that no, if it's under attack anywhere, it's from the manosphere itself. No one's sensible as opposed to men being strong. It's just a distinction of what strength actually is, because it's certainly not this. Masculinity is under attack when people tell you need to be something incredibly rigid that can't possibly encapsulate all the different aspects of a person's identity, meaning they then have to stifle their own sense of self in order to become something that can never fulfill them. And if they fail to become it, then they're supposed to feel weak and ashamed of themselves and pay these influencers money to maybe help them in the pursuit of it, but more likely just exploit them of their earnings. Masculinity is under attack from a bunch of influencers telling young men they can never be secure in themselves, they can never be enough. The classic marketing strategy where the advert says your life is bad and miserable until you buy this product we're offering. That strategy taken to the extreme that it's hard to tell the distinction between advert and reality. You know, like, I know not to take car adverts seriously. I know they're adverts, that it's no real mark against me as a person, that I don't drive the fancy Audi or whatever it is in the advert saying this is how amazing it feels to drive this car. I know not to judge myself by the standard of that, but young men watching these streams, listening to someone aggressively screaming about the weakness of modern men, all too easily that blurs the distinction between advert and reality, and all too easily that would plant a seed to gnaw at your sense of security. And then what happens when all of this paper-thin, fragile attempt to be something masculine, with all this push to do and say extreme things, what happens when that becomes the norm? That becomes the expectation of an influencer and of their fan base, rather than just a trick to gain clout. I think I got a little bit too passionate there, but let me make one final point to try and wrap this up. We haven't really talked much at all about women this video. It's striking how little space there is for them in this documentary. Louis consistently tries to talk to the women in his influencers' lives, and they immediately seek to prevent him either directly shutting down the interviews or else preparing some rehearsed script for the women to follow. But this is the aspect I most wanted the documentary to go further with. The position of the women here and the feelings these influencers have towards them. I would have liked to explore that a lot more, but it's also important to remember the manosphere isn't just about men seeking relationships or just about misogyny and incel culture. Those are all important aspects that I think deserve more attention here. What this experience is like for the women alongside people of the manosphere and how they become objects for a sense of status. But there's the other obvious symbol of status these influencers go chasing after too, that we see a lot more this documentary. Well, one of the other ones apart from the image of strength, which is money. Wealth. At the end of the day, all of this is still about making money. And I don't want to read anything psychological into this, but as a metaphor, I think it's quite apt that we learn Harrison was raised by a single mum who worked incredibly hard, long hours at several different jobs so she could afford to put him through private school, where now Harrison talks with a little disdain towards the idea of people working hard at jobs, being ordered about by their bosses, being stuck like rats in a system, where he is broken free of the system.
Higher powers, the colluding powers at the top of the world that want to keep everyone down, keep everyone broke, keep the slave mindset going, yeah? The people at the top of the world, why would they want people below them to make a load of money and not serve them? Doesn't make sense.
And, I mean, of course, he hasn't broken free of the system. He is perpetuating the system, just now from the position of someone who benefits from it. He is getting rich, exploiting the vulnerable, whilst doing absolutely nothing to tackle any systemic issues whatsoever. In fact, he depends on the system. One of the big reasons young men are drawn to these figures is money, is the wealth they so eagerly flash, the messages that men must provide for their family. A strong man, a proper man, can provide well for his children on his own. And if they follow my advice, they will learn how to do that themselves. that kind of message would not be half as effective if wealth inequality wasn't so terrible nowadays. 50 or 60 years ago, a man could provide for his family on an ordinary job and could even afford a house. Increasingly now, though, men and women both need to work to support the household with the same level of income, and even then, houses are so ridiculously expensive, the best any of us might be able to get could just be a small flat. So the reality of how hard it is to scratch out a livable income nowadays, set against this maintained pressure to earn everything on your own, that's what a real man would do. And then seeing an influencer stand there waving an illusory lottery ticket saying, you can have this, of course that's appealing. A lot has been said in many other videos and just society in general that picks holes in the manospheric ideology, highlights all the contradictions and ridiculousness, and explains why it never fulfills you and may make it harder to attract a woman, or sometimes eat through all of your finances. A lot has been said on that, and a lot has been said of young men needing positive male role models, not just to offer better advice, but to actually support kids when they feel shame or rejected or feel insecure, to be a source of comfort and security to show and give these young men the experience of not needing to feel ashamed of themselves. I myself have vaguely hinted the little part of me that sees a vulnerable child inside Harrison beneath this amorphous mass of a power fantasy that has become his image. All of that is important. However, I don't think people discuss often enough the systemic problems. In a sense, first, of an algorithm that incentivizes this behavior. Harrison argues if he had tried to just be a good person online, he wouldn't have gotten so big. And whilst I don't think it's impossible for good men to make it big, he's probably not wrong. The algorithm will keep incentivizing these kind of creators to spring up until there is some kind of regulation towards the algorithm itself, which would be incredibly difficult to imagine how that would work, and even longer before politicians understand it, but I think would be important. And the other issue of poverty or wealth inequality or the struggle to financially sustain oneself sets against archaic pressures as to how essential that is for a man to do on their own. This is a huge core problem too. Harrison and many of them present themselves as someone outside the system, that others too can be outside the system. But the flaws of this system is exactly what helps build their wealth and influence in the first place. And what is it all for? I find this quote from Harrison so interesting about his future.
I'm not going to stop at small scale. By the time I'm, your age, I'd like to have hundreds of millions valuated company, maybe even in the billions.
That's it. No vision or thought as to what this company is, what it could be. No real passion or creativity there. Just having something worth hundreds of millions of pounds. Just having that status symbol. I just feel like, come on, man. Surely you have dreams. Surely there's something you want to do with your life. He's not an unintelligent man, and he clearly is able to work very hard, and yet there's no curiosity for the world and the people around him, no passion to explore beyond impulse. Personally, one of my favourite things about doing YouTube is how much it functions like my own diary, where if you really set it out, you can chart how I've grown and changed as a person through the course of the videos I've been making throughout my life. But would I see that with Harrison? Would I see him grow as a person, or is he just stuck in a cycle of repetition now, where the only change is the growing speed and the growing intensity of it? A man who views the world at 50 the same as he did at 20 has wasted 30 years of his life. I don't know, when you're sucked into a world, when you depend on the momentum of your online presence so much, and you are earning such ridiculous amounts of money from it, I don't know how you would find your way out of that spiral, how you even gain perspective again when all of the people you're interacting with are either women you're just treating as an object, or else people who think the exact same as you and encourage you further. Your world would just shrink smaller and smaller and grow more conspiratorial. And suddenly the stars, the influential figures of the online world seem just like really lonely, unhealthy people in a society that has no idea how to bring them back down to earth. And I doubt many of you out there have much empathy for people like Harrison, but there's a whole generation of kids who want to be like him. Good, ordinary kids getting drawn down the same path, and for who those kids are at the moment, I'm sure you can have empathy. At the end of the day, I think Louis' own conclusion sums this up very well.
It's tempting to see the extreme male influencers as adversaries spewing hate, and in some ways they are. They are also products of a culture growing up online in a world that's changing at dizzying speed, with narrowing opportunities where the old entitlements of manhood have been challenged. It is perhaps not surprising that some have sought the comfort of a simplified world of game hacks and conspiracy theories. It struck me that the matrix they rail against more accurately describes the algorithmic prison they've created for their followers, an illusion of endless wealth and power that actually only enriches a few at the top.
The only thing I will add is that the creators themselves may be trapped by the same algorithmic prison they created, and if they're trapped, they're only going to keep doubling down and perpetuating it further. But that's this video. I wanted to get something out quickly while it was still topical, so let me know what you think. Comment your thoughts, good or bad. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe, maybe even support me on Patreon or buy me a coffee, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Flying Spider, Luke Hoare, Michael Gallagher, Ben Marie, Thafy, Chad Bramwell and Joshua C. Follier. Thank you.